Yes, Deputy Farnham.
Thank you, sir. Greve de Lec is one of Jersey's most popular and iconic bays with a long and remarkable history, which remains an important and valued part of island life. After the cafe was sold to its current owner, plans were put forward to demolish the existing building and replace it with a small cafe together with a large private dwelling. Planning permission for this scheme was approved in March 2022, and the site was put on the market for £5 million in July 2022. The site, sir, is currently lying disused, empty, and is partially derelict. It is shut off to the public, restricting access to parking, causing recurring problems for the users and the businesses of the bay. In fact, sir, the whole character of the bay has seen a detrimental impact by this and could be changed forever if we do nothing. Many members are probably wondering why the states do not simply buy the site and refurbish it itself. As I mentioned yesterday during the National Trust presentation at 16 New Street, we do not tend to be very good at that. Can I remind members of Le Folly Inn, an historic building of considerable social and heritage value, which has been allowed to continue to decay and fall into decline whilst master plans are drafted, debated, consulted upon, redrafted, and yet have failed to materialise in any substantive form. Sadly, the regeneration so desperately required remains increasingly elusive, and this could equally be applied to Fort Regent, sir, and other projects. So I think we as an Assembly need to decide whether we wish to continue to be responsible for more of this, sir, more of what is seen by the public as procrastination, or whether we can now work together to focus on delivering projects in a timely, prudent, and effective manner. If we are serious about increased efficiency within government, we must recognise the vital role of our partners and the third sector in helping to deliver certain strands of government and Assembly objectives. If we continue to have the mindset of doing everything ourselves, we will simply end up with an ever-increasing and overburdened public sector, sir, greater expenditure, and a depleted third sector. So I am proposing today that the National Trust for Jersey should be seen as an essential partner in this endeavour. The National Trust has a strategic objective to protect and preserve Jersey's coastline and provide access to the public, and launched its coastline campaign, sir, back in March 2006 to bring this into effect. Already they look after over 30 of the island's historic buildings, care for over 2% of the island's natural environment, and their brand, sir, the National Trust, has international recognition and is indeed in synergy with Visit Jersey's key target audience. PwC has recently estimated that the Trust's work benefits Jersey's economy by £11 million every year. And this is achieved at no cost to the taxpayer and is a staggering amount for such a small, local, charitable organisation. So surely, sir, I would contend it is our role as government, as an Assembly, to help facilitate and build the capacity of such organisations in recognition of the benefit they provide to our community. To do otherwise is not sensible, as undoubtedly the work they undertake would then fall to the government to fulfil. To put simply, sir, charities and organisations save us money in the long run. Greve de Lec provides just such an opportunity. The potential vision presented by the Trust is compelling. They will deliver social, cultural, environmental and economic benefits without any further cost to the public, and will ensure this is done in a timely manner and with adequate public consultation. All further developments will be funded by the Trust, sir, and no further state funding will be sought. They have already committed £500,000 to the project and expressed their intent to raise another £2 million, dependent upon the outcomes of the consultation process, sir. And the Trust, that £2.5 million figure, sir, is on a project based, costed by the Trust, and I know a more detail of costings will be forthcoming, sir, should my proposition pass today, which is based on refurbishing the existing facilities and building down there rather than a complete new build, which would be more expensive. Alternatively, sir, removing all of the buildings and returning the site back to nature would cost a lot less. And why would we not, though, want to see an interpretation centre for our coastline and marine environment, together with proper facilities for coasteering, wet wheels and other activities, sir, and educational activities for which facilities would be provided. Above all, their vision is not seeking to make a profit out of this project, but rather to provide a facility which enhances the bay and secures permanent public access. Whilst any rental income generated from the cafe would simply cover the day-to-day running costs, as well as future maintenance and repair, sir. And that's another area where the states are not good at. We have neglected our properties, and we never provide enough budget, sir, for them to be maintained in good order. So in other words, sir, the Trust would ensure that this asset remains financially sustainable. The Trust's track record speaks for itself. In partnership with the government, they acquired Plemor, cleared the site and opened it to the public within a year. Likewise, as part of the fiscal stimulus initiative, they refurbished Morel Farm within just 18 months to create some exceptional self-catering accommodation for the benefits of islanders and our visitor economy. Independently of government, they have restored Devil's Hole, constructed the wetland centre adjacent to St Wan's Pond, saved 16 New Street from demolition to deliver a heritage attraction and a cultural hub, saved the foot buildings from demolition to create a cafe, art gallery and 3 residential units, and refurbished Greve de Lec barracks into studios and self-catering accommodation for Art House Jersey. And what underlines all of these projects is the significant public benefit that has been generated, and it is my contention that this is why they are the most appropriate partner, sir, for the work that needs to be done at Greve de Lec. I believe they will get the job done, giving us a strategic asset which benefits our local community and visitor economy, sir. Of course, some will question, and rightly so, whether 3.6 million is too high a figure for purchasing the site. And there are a number of valuations, I understand, and estimations of what it's worth floating about. But I ask members, sir, when considering this, to think of this as a long-term investment in our coastline, in our natural environment, sir, and in providing a rejuvenation project for Greve de Lec Bay, which is an important part of the island's culture. Undoubtedly, as well, so if we delay, we may make a saving in due course, if any other member thinks they can negotiate a better deal, sir. But equally, the owner may seek to revise their planning application to enhance privacy and, as a result, further reduce public access, sir. If a single dwelling is deemed not viable, we have a site there with residential permission, and that residential, the owner could seek to further enhance that residential permission And so we should be alive to this as a real risk. And whether that is successful or not, it could certainly tie up the site for at least another 2 or 3 years. The purchase price of £3.6 million, sir, to put it into context, is just over 0.3% of projected government expenditure for 2024, and is a relatively small price to pay to safeguard access to one of our strategic coastal sites, sir. Although I think, as I mentioned earlier in questions, in answers to questions, I believe, sir, that funding could be found for this from underspends in 2023 capital projects, but of course that's a matter for the Treasury Minister to decide should this proposition be successful. It should also be acknowledged, sir, that Deputy Stevenson's amendment ensures that the public remains a key stakeholder in the site, because in essence the site will always remain either in the ownership of the trust or the public, thus safeguarding its importance to the island whilst avoiding any what might be classed as inappropriate privatisation. So we buy it, sir, we give it to the National Trust. If at any time in the future they don't want it, they can't sell it, they have to return it to the public. So I'm grateful for Deputy Stevenson for lodging that amendment, and I hope that gives members some confidence. And so largely, sir, based on that, the fact that it either belong to the trust or to the public is key to why I'm asking members today, sir, to agree to purchase the land on behalf of the public and to partner with the National Trust to create something exceptional for islanders, to protect this valuable part of our coastline, sir, for future generations. I make the proposition. Thank you.
Farnham. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does anyone wish to speak on
Point
the
of
proposition?
order, sir.
Yes, Deputy Iron.
Point of order.
Yes.
If I may, sir, the Standing Order 106, I wondered, since this proposition is allocating such a large sum of money to the National Trust for Jersey, it might be appropriate for a declaration of interest for people who are connected to the National Trust for Jersey, and for your consideration as to whether they should be able to vote on the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for raising it, Deputy Iyer, but I can't see how that can be a direct financial interest. Thank you for raising it.
So nonetheless, I will declare that I'm a member of the National Trust.
If you wish to do so, you may wish to, but members aren't, I don't think, required to. Deputy Joan, do you want to speak? Or
Yes,
make a
I also
declaration?
am a member of the National Trust.
Sir, as am I. Likewise, sir.
Well, I've got to make a note, and it's got to be on the transcript. So, Deputy Lehegara, did you make a declaration? Do you want to make? I need to say.
Apologies,
the
sir.
declaration.
Yes, I said I'm a member.
Thank you. Conotable St Martin.
Yes, I'm a member.
Conotable St Bernard.
Yes.
Conotable St Mary.
Yes, I'm a member.
Deputy Catherine Curtis. Deputy Scott.
So I would like to ask, as a member, we don't have financial benefits, so just to declare the membership of
You're not required to declare the membership, but people have voluntarily
paying
done
money
so.
for the membership.
So if they want to...
So I'm the
I don't-
member of the National Trust,
Yeah, I
but
don't-
I'm not
I
getting
don't-
any money from that.
No, you're not, no. Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on this proposition? Yes, Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. I am going to... Oh, sorry. Thank you, sir. I am going to speak in my capacity as Treasury Minister. And the first thing that I do want to say, and I would ask all members to bear this in mind when they do speak, is I feel personally a huge amount of discomfort in discussions about what should be a commercially sensitive matter in this forum, particularly when we are online and anybody can be listening in. And I would ask members to remember that if we vote against the proposition and comments are made about the value of the site, that may be very damaging to the interests of the seller. So I would ask that people do bear that in mind. I don't believe this is the best way to deal with a property purchase, but I will just flag that point. On the 19th of July, the Assembly voted that the Minister for Treasury should negotiate on behalf of the states for the purchase of the site, but secondly, to ensure that the negotiated price represented value for money and that the price was subject to independent review. As a consequence of that decision, valuations have been obtained, and I believe that the former Infrastructure Minister conducted negotiations with the vendor with a view to agreeing a sale price. However, negotiations reached a stage where the asking price remained in excess of the assessed value. The current price is also considerably in excess of the assessed value that the valuers gave to government. Only a week ago, it feels much longer, I was talking here about value for money and how it would be a priority and how I wanted to make sure that we achieved the best outcome for the spend and making sure that we spent money wisely and effectively. And I find it difficult to conclude that on the usual principles of any property transaction that this is value for money. When we look at the proposed price and the valuations. But I think we have to reflect that this is not a usual transaction. We are not buying the site with planning permission for a house and a cafe, which will be part of the valuation, with a view to building a house and a cafe. Quite the reverse. We are buying this site to stop a house being built. So the planning permission and its contribution to valuation, in my opinion, is virtually irrelevant. The National Trust do have a very compelling vision that will also require to go through planning permission, and it will also be subject to the basic principles of is it going to be commercially viable. That's a decision for the National Trust. My understanding was that the National Trust will provide all the funding for the development and that we will not be seeing future propositions asking for money to develop the site. The purpose of this proposition is clearly to preserve the site for the island for the future, because the bay is becoming dilapidated. No bay is more dilapidated, in my opinion, than the one in my own district, which is Bully Bay. The difference being that that's not for sale, I believe, and I believe that is going through planning, and we will have a house on that bay. I do have some concerns as a deputy that we are sending a message to unscrupulous property developers that if they buy land on a bay and get planning permission for a big house, the states will swoop in and buy it from them at a profit. So we need to bear that in mind. But this is about, the proposition is at its heart about saving Bully Bay, Greve de Lec for the benefit of future users and for the island. And that does take us from an objective, value for money, logical perspective, accounting basis, to something that is entirely subjective and actually quite emotional. And it really does come down to how members feel in their own heads and hearts about the proposition. I'm somewhat hampered there in that I don't feel particularly emotionally attached to Greve de Lec, as it's not a bay I've spent a lot of time in. It really is for members to decide whether they think this is money well spent with a view to all the other challenges that we face at the moment. As I say, I think it is an emotional decision, and it's really entirely a matter for members to consider. And I'm going to say no more from a Treasury perspective, and I will leave it in your hands. And the last thing I would simply say that I did comment yesterday at the National Trust presentation, their vision is compelling. It was a very well presented, and it's a very interesting proposition. But I really do hope that they will liaise with Visit Jersey to make sure that to the extent they are seeking to support our tourist economy, that they are developing it in a way with what the reality of our tourist economy is going to be in the future, and that it's not based on a vision that has stopped being real of coach parties and lots and lots of young families coming here as tourists, and that we are addressing the reality of our tourist market and not a memory of it. So, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Conatab of St Saviour.
Thank you, sir. I would agree a great deal with what the Treasury Minister has just said regarding revealing a price. However, I believe it's in the public domain, so I think that horse has actually bolted. I will be supporting this proposition, sir, as amended. I do remember the good old days of many dozens of coaches parked up there, many cars. But even in recent memory, the present car park is really oversubscribed during summer months, and this will be a boon to Greve de Lec to have this car park back. And basically, so once it's gone forever, and we must buy these plots of land as they come up, because I think we need to protect it for the future of our children and grandchildren. La Folie was also touched on, which I would also support. The La Folie's been empty and boarded up for many years. I understand there's that does come under harbours and airports. I understand the plans are afoot, but plans have been afoot for some time now, and it's really time we cracked on. It would make a lovely restaurant or something. We've lost so many beautiful buildings in the past in Jersey, and plus plots of land, and we really must look after the ones we have. As I mentioned, La Folie, also we need accommodation for the Sea Cadets. So we've lost so many things, like the old Forum Cinema and many other theatres and such like. And as I say, once they're gone, they're gone. So I will be supporting this proposition, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Conor Tarr. Does anyone wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Stevens.
Thank you, sir. And I'm grateful to the Deputy for having the proposition read as amended. I lodged the amendment in response to some questions that have been raised by members of the public and around what could happen. They didn't want to see the site sold off for profit in the future, so hopefully it makes a reasonable, hopefully, improvement to the proposition. So I spent most of my summer holiday last year, not the whole summer, but the holiday that I went on in the summer, down in Dorset with my family, fossil hunting on the Jurassic Coast. And we spent a lot of time on Charmouth Beach looking for dinosaurs, as you do when you have 2 young children. And they had a really fabulous interpretation centre at Charmouth. And it was a very simple place, but it was very effective at what it did. Obviously, it did have the call of dinosaurs, which does help. But they had a very simple group of displays alongside a little shop. They had volunteer experts on hand and some displays and things going on TV screens and others. There was a small shop, as I say. There was a local artist downstairs with a pottery studio, which was particularly nice. There was a little fish and chip shop as well. They had guided walks running out of the centre, seashore safaris, school visits did come there. And I did a little bit of looking about some of the visitor numbers, because when we've been talking about Greve de Lec, and I went to the presentation that Deputy Farnham mentioned by the National Trust, and they started talking about an interpretation centre, it really reminded me of this one that I'd visited in Charmouth. And this one in particular welcomes more than 100,000 visitors a year, and it runs as a small charity and is kept open by donations. As I say, it's quite simple but very effective. It has wardens and a team of volunteers on board. But the thing that really struck me when I visited was I was obviously there with young children looking for dinosaurs, as I say, but there was all ages. There was different, there was older couples having their fish and chips. There was tourists, there was locals, people from all over the world were there. And I think what we have in Greve de Lec, but specifically with this proposition and looking towards the National Trust, is we've got a partner who's ready to take on that role now, and they're ready to do it immediately. They're going to contribute some of their own funds to get it going, and resources, and use their contacts and vision, which they're already developing. They have a real capacity, as we've seen over the years as well, the National Trust, to fundraise and launch those public campaigns. And I don't think we should underestimate just how important that is when there's something like this going on. I know that some members, and indeed some members of the public, have asked why, okay, this sounds like a great idea, we want to acquire it, we want to protect it for the public, but why should it be in the National Trust? In my view, they're a key stakeholder in this area already. They own areas of Greve de Lec already and up into the coastline, and really, you know, they are at the heart of this area. They're a trusted partner with a real proven track record, as we've just heard from the Deputy. And as I've just said, I do think they've got the ability to fundraise and do so very effectively and actually quite quickly as well. They share similar principles to what government should be aiming to achieve with this site, in my view. And they're part of a global network which is recognised and respected around the world. I'm also really, really encouraged by the fact that they have committed to a full public consultation before any plans for the site are finalised. I think that's really important. We've heard from many members of the public about this site, or I certainly have, over the past year or so. And, you know, it does have a special place in many islanders' hearts, and I think they would really value being able to contribute towards that as well. I think Deputy Farnham's point about delivery and the capacity of government to deliver at a time when we have so many pressures as well, it is an important one that we should really not forget as well. So as I say, the amendment was a simple one. Hopefully it does strengthen the proposal. And I would just point out again that the Trust has said that they are happy with that condition being added as well. The Treasury Minister has made some important points. And I am glad to hear, though, that she did then move on to considering value in terms of the social, cultural, environmental and economic as well that is mentioned, because, as she did quite rightly point out, this is a subjective point where we're at now. But I would say that it's not just an emotional decision. We regularly talk about our responsibility in this assembly to listen to the views of others, and so we are also acting on behalf of our constituents in that regard, and certainly many of mine have been in touch to say that they absolutely support this. I know they would say that, given that it's St Mary, St One and St Peter, but you know, I think that is really important. That is what we are here to do. It's taken much longer to get to this point than I would have liked, given that some of us have been talking about this since we were first elected. But I do think we do have an opportunity before us here today, which we shouldn't ignore. And we can be bold and exciting, but within our recognising our limitations, or government's limitations, to have that partner on board to be able to help us achieve that, I think, is really exciting and could have a real positive impact for our community and our island, and for visitors as well. I would just remind the Treasury Minister and the Infrastructure Minister that my amendment to Deputy Farnham's first proposition on this matter last year, which was brought and agreed by the Assembly, asked them to consider options, consulting as necessary, for enabling the Government of Jersey to be notified when properties or areas of significant value to the people of Jersey become available, so that early consideration can be given to potentially acquiring them on behalf of the public. 6 months on from that amendment being approved, it would be nice to have an update on that work, and I'll give this as notice that I intend to ask both ministers a question on that matter very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Right, okay. Speaking more today than I am most days. So I won't spend long on this, as I believe members will have their different reasons for voting whichever way on this application, but I cannot support any part of this proposition. I did support the Deputy in July 2023, despite sharing my frustrations that this could have been avoided if process around the application of marketing in the site publicly had been followed and was given greater weighting in the planning process, but I did nonetheless support. What I struggle particularly with here is we as an Assembly agreed an amendment that required us to look at the best value for the site from an independent valuation, and that we should follow that guidance when negotiating. And it seems to me, sir, that we agreed who should perform the negotiating on this site, and we've had a private member negotiate on the site at a price that to my understanding, does not reflect what our independent advice advises us of on the site, and clearly the site has had very little interest in the following 6 months from the proposition. The Treasury Minister has touched on value for money, and I think this is really important that the new government will have to take a grip of, because like all previous governments, we have to grapple with the potential public sector bias. That is when sellers of any service, whether it be IT, infrastructure or property, see government, they see us a million miles off and they go, okay, we've got you over the barrel on this one because we know how to negotiate with you, we know the challenges of public sector procurement. And I think this is a real risk, actually, that we could be, once again, put in a position where we are accepting a substandard price because we are making a political decision. We have to be far stronger in our negotiations as to what things are worth to us. And as I say, especially with the thanks to the amendment from Deputy Stevenson in July, we must ensure that processes are in place, that we have that strength behind any decision we have to make, for example, advance notice of sites. It has also been mentioned that there is a risk of a revised application coming back to the Planning Committee. And I say without prejudice as a Planning Committee member, given all applications will be subject to the relevant policies of whichever live island plan will be there at the point of determination, that I do not see this as a significant risk. It may be that the proposed live application as it is not very interesting to developers to purchase, but I think an application that would minimise further the public realm and the employment land aspects would likely not carry much favour with island plan policies. That said, obviously, all will have to be weighted with the detail of a scheme. What we've also seen from the National Trust, and we must thank them for this, is that there is a good opportunity to reuse buildings on the site. The Planning Committee, on the date they did approve the application, the date the Planning Committee did approve the application, they weighed up all factors, including that of public listing of the site, which did not occur, and they considered that it was the improvement of the landscape character alongside the retention of public access and employment land that was a tightly balanced decision. And any change to that, regardless of financial viability, as I say, is something that I think we do not have to worry about. And the view that we've seen from the architect firm that has worked with the National Trust is there is a way to reuse what is on site, and there is a brighter option that will soften the landscape area of the car park, which was a major concern for committee members on the day. So now that a counterfactual has been provided, I'm sure much more robust discussions at the committee table would occur. Lastly, I should ask, and I'm sure that the deputy who brought this might not be interested in my views at this point, having stated I won't support it, that he will take this in parts, because I think members who I have spoken to may well support purchasing it at this price. That is their right, but some may choose not to support Part B of the application, which would be to give it to the National Trust. And I think I would ask the Deputy to reflect on that, and I will leave members to make their decision. They know how I will vote.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I feel like Deputy Alex Curtis and I are a bit like those weather sort of men, who kind of come in and out, because I did not support the former proposition for government to acquire the site, but I feel warmer towards this one. As with the Plamont proposal, in which public money was used to assist the National Trust in acquiring the former Pontins holiday campsite, the States Assembly is being asked to approve public spending with the object of taking something of potential value to our community out of government hands. Government is regarded as a poor caretaker of public property. That's some admission, sir. Unfortunately, the evidence for it is all too apparent from the many examples of deterioration of the island's public estate from lack of maintenance. I hope that our new Minister for Infrastructure will finally take this in hand. Meanwhile, our local visitor economy is suffering from a lack of investment in a number of ways. Its offering has diminished in many ways, from loss of cafes to continued loss of hotel beds. And we need hotel beds to maintain air and sea links for islanders. If this site is not acquired in the way that is proposed in this proposition, I fear it will become another Zanzibar, in which a former restaurant in St Brelade's Bay was developed for private housing. And this is notwithstanding the planning policies that actually were existent at the time, which remain at the time, that actually sought to protect visitor economy premises through advertising. Having substantial experience of the outcome of planning applications in the case of St Brelade's Bay, I can actually say it's not that difficult to lose restaurant and cafe sites in this way, and it's even easier to lose hotel sites. And sometimes there are good reasons for that, but there are places that we do wish to keep special. So there are a few things that need to be looked at. The extent to which planning officers police the advertising of commercial sites may need to be looked at further, along with the robustness of planning policies to preserve them. And I would be very happy for the Department for Sustainable Economic Development to look into this matter and to give whatever assistance I can. I am in support of this proposition, but I would like to remind States members how we got here. It's because our planning policies are not robust enough to protect the places we wish to keep special for the public. Time and time again, planning policies have been reviewed without this lacuna in planning having been addressed. Planning policies are to be reviewed in the term of this State's Assembly. I suggest it is the responsibility of each State's member to consider the special places in their own constituencies that they believe need to be preserved for their natural beauty or visitor economy value. And it is the responsibility of those States members to learn now if current planning policies are adequate to protect them before the review of planning policies takes place, so that propositions can be brought by us to shape revisions in those planning policies. Because from my experience, having worked with Constable St Brelade in proposing amendments to the Bridging Island Plan, proposing policies to protect sites such as hospitality staff accommodation sites during the formal review of the island plan can be too late. In my experience, it's like, that's not how that structure of this document works. And then there is no policy, and then there is no protection. I commend Deputy Stevenson for her amendment to this proposition, which I think is very sensible. I agree what the National Trust has achieved with the Plymouth Headland is encouraging. Quite what is feasible and sustainable for the site really is a matter that the National Trust itself needs to consider, and I note its intention to raise its own funds to help develop the site while also running a public consultation. In summary, sir, I support this proposition, but I very much hope that we can prevent this coming again and again before the States Assemblies, a large last-ditch attempt to save special places at what could be regarded as an inflated price, and that come the revision of planning policies, we are much more better equipped and more proactive in ensuring this doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Deputy. Right, Alison Clement.
Thank you, sir. So I want to talk about the alternative. Greve de Lec, in my view, is a little gem, and it looks shabby. So the alternative, if we don't grab the nettle by the hand, is that we let it go. The economic cycle is changing. In about 18 months' time, costs for building are already going down slowly. Interest rates are going down, etc., etc. And I fear that the gentleman who owns this property may have a change of heart. I was very disappointed to lose the Water's Edge Hotel a few months ago and felt it could have had many uses, including for the state realm. But the alternative is that if we let it die away, we lose business that's already there. So I need to talk about the price. 3.6 million is probably a bit too expensive. But you get that back. And I'll tell you how. You have 2 thriving cafes down in Greve de Lec, which you may lose if we don't pay attention to the environment, the bus service, the road network, etc., etc. There are 2 hostelries there with accommodation. And there's also the self-catering. Then there's the staffing, the ITIS, the social security that you garner for 20 years to come if you keep the area vibrant. If you don't, then you're going to lose those because they won't be able to trade without footfall. We know, and I do respect, I thoroughly respect the Treasury Minister's trying to keep hold of the purse strings, but occasionally these things come up once in a generation. And in this particular instance, I would implore everybody to protect our heritage, our natural environment, our green areas. I mean, look, the hill coming down Greve de Lec, with all that pasture, the trees and God knows what, and the view straight out across the bay. We need to protect all that for our children, our grandchildren, and also our visitor economy. It's still there. It's still there. It will grow small, in small elements. But we need to protect what we've got. But most importantly, I think we'd be sending a message to the cafe owners and the businesses there that we're not really terribly interested. And just try and work out, if you can, how much money they earn in a season compared to the £3.6 million. Supposing it was half in 1 year, and they've paid their wages, and they've paid their social security, and they've paid their builders and maintenance and food suppliers, and they've paid all those people which makes up our economy. Do we want to lose it, or shall we keep it for posterity, for generations to come? And I'll be voting for the proposition in both parts. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conrad. Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. In much the same vein as the Constable of St Clement, I believe that this is an opportunity. And it's an opportunity that doesn't come about very often. It's an opportunity that we should grab by the hand and say, yes, this is something positive we're going to do for all the people of Jersey, because everyone will have an opportunity to go and enjoy that beautiful beach. I've taken my 90-year-old granny in her wheelchair with her great-grandchildren, and we've dammed up the stream as it comes out, and it's a great place. And we just shouldn't, government have more, it's more important than just money. It's so much that we're going to give back to the people of Jersey, and I implore everyone to support the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I'm a member of the National Trust and they do great work. I want to support this proposition, especially with the amendment from Deputy Stevenson. I would, however, like confirmation on a couple of points that the National Trust does have the funds to undertake the development and to maintain it. Also, I was disappointed at the recent briefing to hear that they had not yet consulted with the users in the area, like the nearby residents, Colleen's Cafe, boat owners, etc. I think it's imperative that an organisation that will be gifted land by the public of Jersey via the State's Assembly should, right from the very start, be consulting with the public. Otherwise, they are seen to be exclusive. So I ask the Deputy to answer these questions in his summing up.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. Actually, it's a question for the Attorney General,
Yes.
if I could. And it's about the amendments, sir. And it's just to understand whether the Attorney General could confirm that, can a contract be written whereby ownership would revert to the government of Jersey, or the states of Jersey, I should say, in the event that the National Trust decides to divest itself of ownership? I mean, how automatic can that be within a contract? So just want to make sure that that is a viable proposition within a contract. Can that be done?
Yes. Mr. Attorney?
So the short answer to the Deputy's question is yes, that an enforceable covenant can be included in a contract to provide that in the event of a change of ownership of the relevant property, then another party has, say, first option to take over the property. There is there is an old concept in Jersey law, which is the maxim of donner et retenir ne vaut. In short, it effectively means that one is not supposed to give and then take back again. I would regard that as a very theoretical risk in this case. It is quite common in contracts for purchase of land that, as I say, in the event of a change of ownership in land, then a party has first rights to reacquire the land. So I give that confirmation.
Thank you, sir. If I may continue my questions, and the reason I ask is as much anything because that's not what the amendment asks for. The amendment doesn't ask that the government or the State of Jersey gets first option. The amendment clearly says that land must be returned to public ownership if the National Trust decides at any time to divest itself of ownership. So the amendment doesn't ask for a first option. The amendment asks for ownership to be passed straight back to the States of Jersey, sir, and that's what I'm trying to understand, sir.
Yes, Mr. Attorney, that's much of the construction of the proposition for me, and the Deputy's right, it's a matter of return to the public.
It is, sir, and I think I think for me to give definitive advice, I think I would need to go away and research this question quite in more detail. I do maintain my preliminary view that that it should be possible to include an enforceable covenant in the way that is set out in the amended proposition. But as regards this question of donner et retenir ne vaut, I'm afraid it's not a question that comes up very often. It is an old concept of customary law, and it arises, or it used to arise, in trust disputes before our trust law was amended. So it is not a concept that frequently arises, but I'm afraid in order to give definitive advice, I would need to research it further.
Sorry, sir, could I
Mr.
follow?
Scott?
Just to follow up with the Attorney General. So, just if I might ask that the current, am I right in thinking that the current, although one alternative could be for a long lease of, say, 999 years, that the way that the current proposition is drafted in talking about a gift doesn't contemplate that as a possibility?
Yes, the Deputy is correct.
So it's more to have a speech now rather than...
Yes, of course. Yes, you can speak now.
Thank you, sir. And it was just to say that my concern around this proposition has always been around the gifting to a third party, sir. I completely agree with those speakers who have talked about bringing it into public ownership, completely at ease with that. As with Deputy Alex Curtis, I am concerned about the price, but I accept that over hundreds of years that disappears as well. Though I would have liked the Treasury Minister to tell us exactly where the money's coming from. That's okay. But my concern is about this gifting to a third party, and it is the issue of a gift, sir. For me, a gift means you're handing over ownership. It's no longer public ownership, it moves into a third party, in this case private ownership of a trust. Obviously, I do hope the Attorney General can come back and tell me that, yes, in a contract we can have something where ownership reverts automatically back. It isn't about first options, because that's not what this proposition asks for, the amendment asks for. And so, for me, sir, I would be a lot more comfortable if we were in a position, as Deputy Scott suggested, where we were talking about long leases, which can be an inordinately long length of time, sir. If, for whatever reason, and in that sense, I am tempted to ask the proposer to take that back and make some amendments to this, so it could be about leases. But equally, the other condition that I wish I'd thought of sooner was that the National Trust of Jersey may choose to divest itself of ownership, so it comes back to us. But also, if the National Trust of Jersey were to stop using it in any way, because again, none of us know in 75, 150, 200 years' time, what state the National Trust for Jersey will be in terms of its finances. None of us know. It's impossible for us to know. We can pretty much guess that the states of Jersey will be here, if we aren't. And so in that sense, you know, the National Trust may fall on hard times at some point in the future and may not be keeping the property up as it should be doing. And in that sort of situation, I would also like to see comfort in ownership reverting back to the states of Jersey, because there would be nothing worse than something that we've bought, we've gifted, and then isn't being used properly and isn't being maintained properly. And the public would then just have to put up with that. So for me, sir, I do have concerns. I definitely go with the idea of having this being taken in parts, because I do struggle with the gifting, because I don't have confirmation from the Attorney General, and I do think there are better ways of handling the ownership so that ownership maintains with the public, but a long lease can be given, as you said, a very, very long lease can be given, which would in itself, that lease contract, would likely have terms such as if the property is not being kept up, it would revert back, you know, the lease would fall and it would revert back to the government. So that's where I am with this, sir. I'm fine with the concept of the public buying it. I'm good with that, sir. I can handle the price, but I do struggle on the gifting, because I'm not sure we can get that back, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Conor Tarber of St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And I'm very much aligned with the thoughts of Deputy Morell as I understand them. The area is in with my own parish, and my feedback is, and was at the time of the regional planning application, was asked a concern about residents and members of the island community as a whole being deprived of access to the beach and the car parking that goes with it. And I maintain that is their main concern. So where I'm coming from, sir, is that looking at the proposition as a whole, we are in one breath buying the land and then handing over full control to National Trust. I'm not saying for a moment that National Trust haven't got good ideas, but it seems to me that having acquired the land, it should be the states of Jersey, through our scrutiny process, that decides whether the plans submitted are the best way forward. And my present inclination, I will listen to other arguments, is that we stick to Part A, which, yes, we buy the land. I think the price is probably more than I would want, but we are where we are, as they say. But again, as Deputy Morell said, the future is more concerning. And again, I understand from the presentation that National Trust do have the facilities to clear the area and put the car park back for 48 spaces very, very, very quickly. But the rest is going to involve resourcing from the public as well. They were looking for funding for it, which brings up the situation as to how long is that going to take. And I think we should perhaps be considering some form of time limit by which they should implement certain proposals. At the moment, it seems to be open-ended, and once we've given it, the states have no leverage over what should happen. And I say so, my present inclination is to approve Part A, but hold back on the rest. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Conor Tarber. Deputy Brenneth.
Thank you, sir. I must say I share with Deputy Alex Curtis some frustration at the situation we find ourselves in here. I perhaps, however, will come down slightly on the other side of the dividing line in terms of voting, having found that a very close decision. I think it's worth thinking about how we got here and the fact that we are, in a sense, avoiding some of the harder questions that this situation raises for us, which, if we look at the history to this, the initial planning application on the site was approved partly on the basis that it would involve a significant shrinkage of the footprint of the built area. And the planning committee approved it with that carrying considerable weight, as I recall, and I recall it because I was one of the objectors, along with Deputy Curtis, to that application. I believe, incidentally, although he'd need to confirm it for me, that Deputy Lucis was the only member of the committee who voted against that application. Then on as members will know, there's an appeal window for 28 days in which the application can be appealed. And then on the day the appeal window closed, I think maybe the day after, an application was put in to expand the house on the site. In other words, the initial application was approved significantly on the basis that it was a shrinkage, and then as soon as the opportunity arose to increase it, the footprint was then increased again, and therefore increasing the value, of course, of the site. So I think, in a sense, none of this, of course, is wrong, by the way. The developer is entirely entitled to do that, good luck to them, in a way. But I think it does raise serious questions for us about our planning system, that we allow this kind of thing to happen, because, you could say, in a way, we've been done over. Yeah, the property was initially valued at £1.5 million. And thanks to the way our planning system operates, we're going to, if we prove this, pay £3.6 million for it. And that's why I say frustration, because it feels to me like we're applying a sticking plaster here and we're avoiding the actual hard decisions which we might need to take in order to remedy this from a structural point of view, rather than just thinking every time a property comes up that we have an emotional attachment to, we try and do something about it. My second point is that, contrary to some speakers, I do actually support the National Trust taking over the site. I don't have as much concern about the reversion clause, and it seems to me, although obviously I need to defer to the legal opinion on this, that the first option to buy is simply the mechanism to achieve the objectives set out in the proposition. The proposition simply states what we would like to do, and the Attorney General has outlined the traditional method, if you like, by which that would be achieved through law. So I don't have as much concern about that. I also think that the points made by Deputy Farnham are in connection with the alacrity with which the thing might progress, the project might progress, hold weight here. And the fact is the National Trust are able to move relatively quickly. They have demonstrated this by their track record. For the record, I would say I don't want to see the site levelled. I think where we have development that sits in the landscape that already exists, it represents a terrific opportunity for the island. And I think it requires a kind of a leap of imagination. We need to think beyond what's there now and the fact that there's a cafe and would it take business and so on. What we're talking about here is reimagining what Greve de Lec Bay is in the island's ecosystem, if you like, of tourist and leisure offerings. Because the potential for that bay to become a hub for various activities which are currently not well catered for, coast steering in particular, but paddleboarding springs to mind as well, kayaking, surfing, they all operate out of Greve de Lec at the moment, but do so in a kind of stunted and handicapped fashion because of the facilities to store equipment, to unload equipment and so on are difficult to access. And so what I would encourage the National Trust, if they do end up taking this over, is to think about not just the Interpretation Centre, which is a very educational and worthy and important part of what might happen at the site, but to focus on the opportunities in terms of leisure and tourism activities. Thinking about, for example, the way in St. Juan's Bay, the Altico restaurant has the surf shop next to it, and those two things are very synergistic, and they support each other massively. And I could see how in Greve de Lec that might also be the case. And so I think that rather than go for the cheap option, in a way, which is to be demolished and returned to nature, which would no doubt look lovely, I think we have too much of an opportunity to go down that route. So I think my final point is around the frustration that I mentioned at the beginning, and thinking a bit bigger about what the implications are that are raised here. And I would make a few points. We always think of these purchases in terms of the countryside, and whenever these things come up, whether it's the Bully Bay Hotel, which has often been referenced, obviously Plemont, we're talking about the countryside. we're not thinking in a strategic way about how the government or the people of Jersey might gain access to strategic sites that are important. And we don't often think about this in terms of town, where or the built-up area in general, where the need for green areas, for strategic assets which may be nothing to do actually with the environment, car parking or schools or whatever, school sites. We don't have a mechanism where we can intervene as government to do something about that. And I think I really commend Deputy Stevenson for her amendment to the original proposition, and I'm disappointed in a way that there hasn't been more progress in that, because we do need to think bigger. You know, we could think about lots of things. We could think about turning JPH into Jersey Property Holdings into an arm's length organisation and giving them greater freedom, and possibly giving them a mandate to purchase property as one example, but just an idea. But we don't have a strategic purchase arm, so we act in an ad hoc way at the moment. The opportunity to have a mechanism by which government has effectively first refusal or has the ability to move in on a purchase at the same price that the private sector has been able to agree, is something that works in France. In France, it's common for a local authority to be able to, if you like, trump a purchase that has been agreed between private purchasers because it is regarded as a strategic asset. The seller still gets the same price, but the government gets the asset. Now, I'm not saying that either of these solutions are the ones that would work for Jersey. But I do think that if we're to avoid this situation where we keep coming back to the Assembly with ad hoc things, we should think about that very seriously. Because at the moment, we're being presented with this as if it's a kind of pain-free purchase, out of underspends that in the capital budget and so on. But it isn't really. Those underspends would normally be rolled forward and the projects would continue. So something is going to have to give here to make this happen. That 3.6 million is money that isn't going to be spent, that would have been spent on something else. It isn't a pain-free purchase. So that lack of a strategic vision here is what is really hurting us. I will support the proposition in both parts, because I do think we've been left in with an opportunity that we can't turn down. But it pains me greatly that we find ourselves in this position because of the weakness of the planning system that we have, and not just the planning system, actually, it's only partly the planning system. It is this lack of strategic vision. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Connaught of St John.
Thank you, sir. So we've heard both Deputy Stevenson and Deputy Randolph speak about the need for us to look at potential strategic assets. And I fully support this view, and I know that Deputy Binet was thinking along similar lines when he was the Minister. So just today I've received information about potential sites that the island may be interested in that I will explore with officers and colleagues. Likewise, sir, we need to make some decisions to divest land and property that may no longer be of use to the island and release some capital if it is appropriate. That capital, sir, could be used to invest in strategic sites. Sir, speakers have spoken about the lack of investment in our estate. So as I said last week, I will champion investment in this area, but I would remind members that we all have a part to play when it comes to setting our government plan and when funding is asked for. So in my view, there is as much need for car parking in St Helier as there is in the west of the island. In fact, sir, there is a more pressing need for parking in St Helier than there is for the seasonal peak at Greve de Lec. I'd also like to assure Deputy Stevenson that it's not only residents of her district who use the bay. I know many St John's residents use the bay for a whole host of reasons. So I've had a number of those parishioners contact me to encourage me to support this proposition. And if I may, I'd like to quote from just one of those pieces of correspondence. After talking about how they use the bay and how long they've used the bay, they go on to say, now that the car park is not available, parking is not always available in the Martello car park. And when it is, a busy road with a particularly blind corner has to be negotiated with the children. Use of the car park when it is returned to public availability is sorely needed from a safety perspective. It is also our great wish as a Jersey family that the site is not developed for housing for an uber-wealthy individual, as this would spoil the bay completely. Sir, having listened to speakers, I think the priority is to buy the land, and I don't think we need to rush into a decision as to how this is managed going forward. So I will support Part A, but possibly not Part B. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor. Any member to speak on the proposition? Yes, Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. Of course, just as I want to speak, my screen goes blank, so that's really handy. Okay, as much as I inherently support the initiative, my greater concern is its cost and perceived inequity. And I found it really interesting to hear Constable Jean talk about strategic assets and how we should be considering that. So the Constable of St John used the term the indefensible use of public money in a previous debate. He referred to the spending of £240,000, an investment in the skills and expertise needed to oversee improvements in patient safety. This Assembly is being asked to spend £3.6 million on a car park and buildings. Is this a defensible use of public money? So I want to move on to what for me is a far more important issue, and that is of the perceived inequity. And I'm a little disappointed that none of my fellow town deputies have stood up and said anything to date. As a St Helier deputy, I am very concerned that the Gas Place site continues to remain undeveloped, a running sore in the middle of St Helier. The fundamental problem is there has been little appetite from the government of the day to pay Andium for the site. A site Andium purchased back in 2017 for £10 million, and which has subsequently had 2 planning refusals and has incurred further costs for site clearance of £5 million. Because of this reticence to open the purse strings, the Gas Place site remains undeveloped for either a school, as we've been discussing this morning, or a full park extension, which I know the Constable of St Helier is desperate to see. The north of St Helier has historically been one of the most deprived areas of our island. Its residents have been treated as second-class citizens for far too long. They need reassurance that this government will look after their interests. These are the people who probably aren't even aware that this debate is taking place, because they're probably working their second job, and hence they need their deputies to defend their right to great public space. I will therefore only support this proposition if the Chief Minister will guarantee, I'm referring to Chief Minister, I guess this is brought as a deputy proposition, that Treasury makes a payment to Andium Homes of £15 million for the Gas Place site at the same time as paying for the Grave de Lec site. That is, I believe, the most equitable solution. If he feels unable to, or unwilling to make that commitment, I will be unable to support the proposition. I trust my fellow town deputies and the Constable of St Helier feel as strongly as I do on this matter and will come to the same conclusion and put the interests of their constituents ahead of any Council of Ministers directives.
Thank you, Deputy. Attorney General.
Yes, just 2 further thoughts following from my previous answers. I hope the Assembly would forgive me for standing up again. It's just this issue has arisen at quite short notice, and I've not had a great deal of time to consider the matter. Firstly, sir, in relation to how a gift and then a return might be structured in accordance with Part C of the proposition, there is a precedent of sorts in the gift of the foreshore by Her late Majesty to the public of the island, and a condition was included in that contract whereby there was an express clause that there could be no contract of alienation of any part of the seabed passed before the Royal Court, except one that included the contracted party of Her Majesty to confirm and ratify the conditions thereof. So there is a precedent of sorts there. The second thought, sir, is really perhaps more one for you, in that the wording of propositions is a matter for the interpretation of the presiding officer. And that is that Part C of the proposition, the way it's worded, although it would be preferable if it did have express reference perhaps to a lease or some other more tried and tested mechanism for this sort of situation. Nevertheless, it does not preclude use of a lease in terms of the way it's worded. It simply provides that the land is subject to a condition that the land must be returned to the public ownership if the National Trust for Jersey decides at any time to divest itself of ownership. Now, so it's not specific or mandatory as to how that condition of a return of ownership might be achieved. And it may be so that you might think that that does not preclude the mechanism of a lease for achieving that transfer of ownership in that eventuality. So I'm sorry to raise that with you, but those are just simply thoughts that have arisen to me given the short notice that I've had to consider the matter.
Yes, but it's not being suggested that it's desirable for the property to be returned to the public by way of a lease, but that under B, some members suggested that under B, the property should be leased to the National Trust and not gifted to them. That was the point that was raised by Deputy Morell and I think others. Under B, it's plain that what the Assembly has been asked to consider is a gift, and under C is a return, which I interpret as a giving back, which is the dictionary definition of return, which sounds like a re-gifting of the land to the public at that time. Deputy Coles. Deputy Scott, do you have a question with the attorney?
Yes, I'm sorry, I just wanted to follow up. Just does this also apply in the case of a USO-free, and could a USO-free be used for in the case of the National Trust?
Mr. Attorney? Is it a question for the attorney? I hope so. I think it probably is.
I thank the Deputy for the question. I think in principle it would potentially apply to a user for it, but again, I would need time to consider that. I apologise to the Deputy.
Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. And I'm proud to follow the other deputy for St Helier who spoke before me in this. And I'm wondering whether or not some of the ifs and buts, or no ifs and no buts, are coming back in his manifesto now that he's no longer in government. Because, as you may recall, that another St Helier deputy brought a proposition to see the park extended, but of course another deputy voted against it. I'm interested in his maths, that how the value of the land on the gas place went from 10 million to 15 million in the course of a conversation, when we've seen the value of the land at Greve de Lec go from 5 million to 3.6 million. So, I mean, land transactions do change. The free market is what free marketeers want it to be. But that's enough about that, and actually more about the subject in hand of Greve de Lec. And I was glad to hear the Constable of St John and the Infrastructure Minister talking about maybe considering properties of strategic interest. I was talking to some other deputies in the room back there about if we actually had a strategic list of property that we might consider would be in the public interest, that we should keep a private list of that and review it when we know these properties may be coming for sale. And actually we could buy them before they achieve planning permission, which then inflates the price. We need to think more proactively, so we're not facing actions that cause us to pay over the initial odds that we could avoid, and be proactive. But I also agree with the Constable that we're holding on to some things which are no longer within our interest. And actually, yes, we can sell these properties, hold that capital, and then maybe this could be the capital that is used for this list of purchases. Let's face it, we have seen our coast eroded, and I keep thinking of certain places. So I think of Beauport in St Brellards, because I recently discovered that the land that leads down onto that part of the bay is actually still owned by the Boots Foundation. Luckily, we have public access right through it. However, it is still technically in private ownership, and the owners of that land could choose to remove access to it at some point. I mean, we saw when another private property owner built a big fence around that area to keep his land secure, that, you know, ownership changes, people's ideas of what they want to use this land for changes. We do have planning which helps restrict the amount of change that can be implemented. However, I always worry about the public not being able to access this coastline. It's a beautiful area down there. It's still actually a fairly thriving area down there. I mean, we've got the cafe in Colleen's. You have the Prince of Wales Hotel, not to be confused with the pub. I've made that mistake and been in the wrong parish. And then you've got the Moulin de Lec. So there's another eatery down there. This area is still a thriving hub. And to see another cafe or catering area lost into a private home, I mean, that never sat right with me, and then unfortunately I wasn't on the committee when that was, otherwise I would have been voting against a private dwelling being built there, because I can't justify the loss of commercial land in that place, because it is thriving, it's beautiful. And I liked what Deputy Renouf was saying, you know, talking about linking businesses in synergy with each other, with the surf school and cafe from El Tico and Lanzi's in St. Peter's. So, you know, these things are very, very important for our island and our island community. This nature, though, between gifting and gifting back, I mean, and I say, as you've said this, there's a certain level of interpretation there. And, you know, in my mind, when you talk about a gift, if you're giving someone the use of something for free, is that not a gift? You know, and having that then re-gifted back. I mean, so I do commend Deputy Stevenson's I'm sorry she's not in the room, but for her amendment, because it makes this whole proposition a lot more agreeable. But with others, I definitely agree that Part A should be a priority. If there is work needing to be done around B and C, then maybe I suggest that I would definitely support this in parts, but I'm certainly going to support Part A.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. And I think we need... I'm going to try and... We seem to have gone off a little bit from Greve de Lec into other areas, so let's try and draw it back, but draw parallels and why that is relevant in terms of what's happening at Gas Place, for example. I do have to say something about that, sir, because I think there's some of the narrative has been forgotten. That area would have been a large housing estate of totally unaffordable homes for the majority of this population if I had not brought an amendment to the Bridging Island plan to protect it to be used only for education if it was to be built. So actually St Helier deputies have done an enormous amount to protect that area, and we've continued to do that. Mine was no ifs, no buts, don't build a massive housing estate on it, sir, and that was the right thing to do. However, there's flexibility there, and I link it to the Greve de Lec site. This looks like a meaningful proposition where the money can be found. Let's just say that. The money can be found, and it can be taken into ownership and used for the public good. So it can be taken and used for the public good, and then if that changes later on, it comes back to the ownership of government. So there's a guarantee built into that. And I too would thank Deputy Stevenson for bringing this amendment because it makes it more palatable. So I'm all for that approach. Very quick, very certain, no messing around. And I go back, sir, to the parallel with Gas Place, where all we've had is constant messing around. And let's be honest about it. For the last 2 years, the government that was in has not moved it to the place we want to be, and to have a housing minister, ex-housing minister, now standing up and say, do something about the purchase of it for Andium, seems a little bit rich to me, sir, given that, yes, that does need to be done, but it hasn't been done for the last 2 years. The Island Plan Amendment was taken some years ago in the government before that. It was very clear as to what it was for. I will also add, sir, there was an amendment to build a youth facility. Unfortunately, obstacles have been put in the way of that because there hasn't been a coordinated approach. And so to go back to this parallel with Greve de Lec, if we can have a coordinated approach to this sort of scheme, we can certainly have a coordinated approach to the centre of St Helier, where there is a desperate need for a renewed school. In terms of demographics, that's a different argument. And that argument has been around, hasn't appeared overnight.
That must have been around for months and months and months, if not a year or so, in the old government, sir. So I don't know why that too hasn't been addressed. But I, sir, having inherited this, will certainly be addressing those issues to move forward, because we need to. But what we need, sir, is decisions. And what we have with this is an amended proposition from across the Assembly with some sort of cooperative assembly. I will make one point which perhaps will not make me particularly popular, but I'd like people to listen carefully to what I say. It seems that when it's country parishes, we can come to these conclusions very quickly. I would make a plea to say, let's come to these conclusions as quickly for the centre of St Helier, because I think that's fairness, sir. And I think there is a fairness across this Assembly when we look at this. For the centre of St Helier as well, where there is desperate need and the largest population growth of anywhere in the island. So, yes, sir, I think this is a good... I can support this for those reasons. And I will be coming back to those. I was certainly... too much away, be coming back to those around the Council of the Ministers table. But I don't think the Chief Minister would expect anything else, to be quite frank, because that's the right thing to do. And so, sir, before we start having these divisive narratives, I think what we need to do is we need to look at the genuine long-term narrative as to where we are with all of these things. I too agree with Deputy Coles. I did not want to see this become a luxury private home where people do not have access. And to draw this directly back to this proposition at this moment in time, this is a step forward because it stops that happening. Will it be perfect? Don't know. But with the amendment, it means it will come back into ownership of government, so there is another option there which opens it up to the public of Jersey and doesn't take it away. I think that's a very important point, and it's for those reasons that I can support this proposition as amended, and I would say to members, please do think about that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. I've just got a couple of points to make that I'd like the Deputy to address in his summing up. As many other members have said, Greve de Lec does have a special place in a lot of islanders' hearts, and it certainly does in mine. In fact, I seem to remember learning to swim in Greve de Lec. And I have a certain sympathy with Part A of the proposition. What I would like to understand, please, is the involvement of the National Trust. Did the Deputy approach the National Trust, or was it the National Trust that approached the Deputy to offer their services to develop the land? And were other heritage organisations in Jersey, we have two in particular who already manage heritage assets, Jersey Heritage and also La Société Gériès. Was there any consideration given or even questions asked about whether they would be interested in managing this asset? And also, sir, if Part B or C isn't passed, would the Deputy consider giving consideration to a tender process so that other heritage organisations might wish to tender for development and management of the site?
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the proposition? Colin Thompson.
Thank you, sir. I have a long track record for supporting the state's investment in sites all around the island to protect our coast and countryside, particularly the acquisition of Plemon, which I think came to the States twice. And for that, I've earned the concern, the scorn in some cases, of some parishioners who say, why am I supporting such an investment in, for example, Greve de Lec? And my simple answer is that Greve de Lec belongs to us all. It doesn't just belong to people who are lucky enough to live in those coastal parishes. It particularly is important for St Helier residents who put up with so much living in the town, particularly in the parts of town which are not well served with open space or with parking or with other quality of life measures. And it means that they can get out of town. That is, of course, if they're allowed to have a car parking space. They can get out of town, or they can use the bus or get on their bicycles if they're able to, and they can enjoy Plemon enlarged and improved as it was as a result of our decision. And hopefully they will be able to enjoy a much improved Greve de Lec. So that's why, sir, I support this proposition, and I will continue to support propositions which invest in our island for the benefit of us all, and also for our tourists, of course. And I'm grateful to Deputy Farnham because when I approached him about this proposition, I said I had an amendment in the wings in relation to a site in St Helier which is up for sale at a fraction of the price of this site, which can, and I believe will, provide community benefits to hundreds of people living in the back streets of town, if you like. That he encouraged me not to amend his proposition, I suppose that makes sense, but to bring it to the Council of Ministers table, and that is what I will do. He hasn't given me that in writing, but I know he's an honourable man, and I will certainly be bringing that and other strategic acquisitions to the Council of Ministers table. And I'm grateful to my minister, and that is the first time I've been able to use that phrase in, I don't know, about 20 years. I'm grateful to the Minister for Infrastructure for his speech earlier today when he talked about the greater need for car parking in St Helier than at Greve de Lec. He's absolutely right. And indeed, perhaps a more surprising intervention from Deputy Renouf, who also recognised the need for strategic purchase in town, not only for sites of special interest, but also I think he mentioned open space, environmental areas, and even car parking. And as members will know who frequent the Havre de Pas Improvement Group, there is a site that is available to provide a much-needed car park for that precious part of coastal St Helier. And I will certainly be bringing that forward to the Council of Ministers and say, let's build a car park, let's get this through let's get it across the various hurdles that have been put up in the past against developing off-street car parks, because there is a case to be made for a car park in Havre de Pas. Now, so I'm conscious I'm straying off the subject. I've moved away from St Mary down into St Helier. I need to get back to St Mary quickly. But before I do, I just want to mention to my friend, the Minister for Education, soon to be, that I think his narrative in relation to the town park expansion is slightly inaccurate. But I'm not going to get involved in that now because this is not a debate about the Jersey gas site, and perhaps it was a bit naughty of Deputy Ward to bring it in the first place because, of course, a Reform felt they had to reply to him. But there is a long history in relation to the Jersey gas site, and I've been intimately involved in that, and I should know what the facts are. And there'll be another time to have that debate. But for now, we are asked to recognise the importance of this site. For those who are nervous about Part B, who don't want to see the National Trust take this on, I would just like to take them down Pitt Street in St Helier, where for years we had a derelict, very valuable in terms of heritage, very valuable property, the Pitt Street property, almost as long as I remember, that has been derelict. Several versions were looked at to try and get it moving, but finally the co-op, and hats off to the co-op for that, in consultation and working closely with the National Trust, came up with a scheme which I think we all recognise as being quite superb. Pitt Street itself has been transformed from a grubby alley into a wonderful street to walk along. It seems to me to have actually increased in size. I'm informed, reliably informed, that it's the same size as it was before. But that just shows you what regeneration can do to historic properties. There's a wonderful cafe in there that's doing well. And I would just urge members to let the experts in this field, the National Trust, get busy in Greve de Lec, because I don't think we'll regret it, and I don't think tourists will regret it. It will be another jewel in the crown of Jersey's tourism offer. So I urge members to accept both parts of this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Taddeo.
Thank you, sir. I won't get involved in any debates on the gas place site. I will note, though, we have been here in a similar way before. I think it was back in 2013 when then Senator Balash brought a proposition to buy Plemore Headland for the National Trust, so very much a similar proposition. And I'm reminded, perhaps following Constable of St Helier is appropriate, because I was involved in that campaign, not just as a politician, but also as a musician. So it was our band, Badlebeck at the time, who was commissioned by the National Trust to write and perform a song. So obviously credit go to, in part to Kit Ashton, and no doubt he had help from some Gerrier speakers with that as well, some other Gerrier speakers. But I will quote from some of that poetry, which was then set to music, which said, "A worth more dear than cash, a wilderness to tread, as values turn to ash on the headland in our head." And then this hill unfolds the past, its future sparks like fire, but will our great-grandchildren cast their line from our desire? Some of it's in Gerrier, by the way, so I'm sparing you that. Not because I'm sparing you my accent rather than the actual words. It talks about, "Come on, let the beacon flame, and from the ashes there'll be little green shoots growing back again." And then the last part is, "Come on, come on. Oh, you know what to do, and you know that from the ashes there'll be little green shoots." And I'm sure there was a line about little green shoots on your tax return. There is one in there. And that wasn't just a throwaway comment, because it highlights the fact that we are using taxpayers' money here to buy land back for the public. And so that we shouldn't take that lightly when we're doing that. And in that first debate, there was very much, I think, a town-country rift. And I think this was in the days before Reform Jersey had existed formally. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary. And it was something that the three or four existing members that we had that would become Reform Jersey couldn't necessarily agree on. And so at the time, I was very much in favour of buying the headlands, but I was also very sensitive to the issues that were going on in St Helier. And I hope things have changed slightly, but there's fundamentally been an issue in this island about the division between town and country. We know that there's that famous work by John Kelleher that talks about the triumph of the country. And I think a lot of that is still as relevant as it is today. And so I'm actually very comfortable with purchasing this land for the National Trust, because fundamentally I think that the National Trust are great custodians for the land that they already own and that they manage on behalf of the public. If it was just simply left to public ownership and hadn't been maintained, which is a potential risk if it had been left simply in government ownership, I'm not saying that government can't and don't maintain areas. We have some beautiful parks that are maintained by parishes and by the government of Jersey, for example. But it's something that the National Trust do for us, and I think that value which everyone can access those lands. And I for example, regularly, or if not regularly, often walk around Sorrel, down Devil's Hole, and that's a beautiful stretch of coastline where you can imagine for a few minutes or hours that you're in somewhere that's not at all built up, and you don't even see any houses along that a stretch of coastline. It really is beautifully maintained. I know that there will be some National Trust people listening. I have to also recognise that it is perhaps understandable that there's been some questions raised about some of the decisions that have been made by the National Trust in recent times. I think eyebrows were raised on two occasions, one where they seem to have sold off a property that they owned for an undervalued price. I don't know the ins and outs of that, but that's certainly how it looked from the outside, and many commentators were commenting on that fact, and to the point where they've actually agreed to review their internal procedures to make sure that potential doesn't happen again. And also personally, I just think they were on the wrong side of the debate during the Bully Bay Flats development there. I was disappointed that an organisation which traditionally has stood up for protecting our coastline, I think on this occasion were on the wrong side, but no doubt they would have had other considerations about what seeing that area being used, because it is a public area, it's not the same as other coastline areas. So we can agree, I think, to differ, but the overall track record has overwhelmingly been a positive one from the National Trust. So I think they're an organisation that we can trust in this regard. There are one or two questions to be asked and answered, I think. First of all, there are very different propositions coming before us as to what ultimately happens with the land. It's one thing to say we will buy the land and raise it, so flatten it. Raising it is one of those strange words, isn't it? It sounds like it should mean to increase the height of, but it actually means to decrease it. There's a word for that. That would seem the simplest thing. It would be putting it back to nature. It would be making sure that it could be enjoyed. We've had alternative suggestions from the former planning minister, who I would say some quite radical suggestions I didn't realise he was necessarily that radical in his politics, and maybe that's the reason he never wanted to join Reform Jersey. It's not because we're too left-wing for him, but maybe the other way round. But I'll leave that slightly tongue-in-cheek comment on the record, because I think that there is a valid question to ask about what should a government or a state's appetite be for purchasing land back for the public. And in some cases, this is, you could argue, is land that should have never been in public ownership in the first place. What I do find slightly curious is that the original private development that was passed, we're told in the report, was for a 4-bedroom house which would include a 100-seat eatery. So the suggestion that this is entirely going out of public ownership, or at least public accessibility, is not really true, is it? Because if you're going to have a 4-bedroom house with a 100-seater restaurant on it, you presumably need to allow people to access that restaurant. I don't think it's going to be a private club or anything like that, and you would have to have a car park to make sure people could visit that. But I don't know if I'm on the right track there. I'm getting whispers from behind me. So if indeed the National Trust decide that we're going to gift them this land, and it, I think the amendment is absolutely correct, and is a great safety net there. So if it's ever sold, it should revert back to public ownership, not into other private hands. But how might you feel if you were a local business in the area, if you were the Moulin or the Red Rose, not the Red Rose Cafe, I think that's the restaurant, isn't it? Collins, but you've also got the other one that's attached. Sorry, we're having a conversation here, I know, through the chair. There is another, there is the Prince of Wales, and I think it's called the Red Rose Cafe. That's attached to it. I might be wrong, the restaurant there. And imagine you have a scenario where we gift this land to the National Trust, and then they decide that actually, rather than putting it all back to nature, they want to build their own cafe and restaurant there and run that effectively as a private business where all the profits that they make go back to them. You might feel that you're a bit hard done by when you're a private owner and you think, actually, I've had to buy this land myself, invest this money myself, and now we've got some competition sitting there. And you almost might feel hard done by as a taxpayer when you're thinking, shouldn't we actually partially own that enterprise? So we don't mind gifting you the land, but actually if you're going to build a cafe or a restaurant, that's kind of taking the National Trust completely away from what they normally do. They don't normally, they're not venture capitalists in that sense, even if they are reinvesting that capital back into the National Trust. So that's a completely different proposition to what I might be comfortable with and other members might be comfortable, and what the public and indeed National Trust members might be comfortable with. So if that were the case, that we were going to actually see a restaurant being built there, I would say, well, actually, can we co-own that restaurant with you? Or can the government co-own that with you? And can Highlands College run that restaurant for you? Can we make it into a catering facility? Or if the suggestion is, perhaps from Deputy Renouf, that it should be a surf school or something similar, for green tourism, that's all fine, but then how does the co-ownership of that work, and how do we actually get that money back into states' coffers if we are going to get any money back, not simply through just usual spending in the economy, the economic multiplier effect, and any taxation we might indirectly get back through GST and tourist receipts. So I think these are slightly complicated questions, which I hope that the mover of the proposition, and as I've said, I do support the proposition and I will be supporting it, but I think what ends up going on that site, we can't sleepwalk to that position, so we will make a decision today, and we're abdicating a lot of responsibility to the National Trust, and a lot of trust, if you like, is going into what they finally decide to put there. And I want to make sure that we're not blamed for any unintended consequences that might happen as a result of this decision.
Thank you, Deputy. Connotar of Trinity.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't intending to speak in this debate, but it seems to be getting quite wide this afternoon, and a lot of what I perceive to be implied criticism of the Planning Committee and decisions that have been made in the past. And I would remind members that this Assembly delegates responsibility for making planning decisions on their behalf to a committee. If they're not happy with that arrangement, then perhaps they should bring it all back to this Assembly, and we could spend weeks and weeks and weeks in here arguing about every single planning application. Reference has been made to the Water's Edge in my own parish, the Water's Edge Hotel, which has sat there for more than 10 years, completely derelict, albeit with some planning approvals for flats,
but nobody coming forward with the money to build that. And as soon as somebody pops up and says, I'd actually like to acquire this site, which incidentally is in private ownership, all of a sudden to develop one private house and, in my opinion, make a massive improvement to the geography and the landscape in that area by doing so, all of a sudden that's all wrong, and we should be doing something else for the public. Turning to the question of the application which was approved at Grave de Lec, again, I took part in that decision, and I absolutely stand by that decision, that it was the right thing. It's a site which is in private ownership. It reduces a great big landscape of tarmac to an attractive, reduced scale of development. It isolated the existing bunker, and it still provided a quality public offering in terms of food and a restoration of the dune landscape. So to me, it was a absolutely right decision to make at that time. Turning to the proposition before us today, yes, I can understand that perhaps there is some merit in actually perhaps acquiring this site for the public. I'm certainly concerned that we're paying over the odds for it. And again, picking up on a comment which was made earlier about strategic vision. So often we see situations where all of a sudden somebody takes the initiative to make a planning application, improve the value of the site, and all of a sudden we decide that's the point at which we want to spend more public money to buy something back. And on that subject, I'd also say I do regret the fact that the parish of St Helier sold the old quarry at Westmount to a private developer. That could have been a car park, or it could have been the back room areas, the service areas for a hospital on People's Park, and there could have been a link across the top to the existing facilities at Overdale. But again, that was a decision lost. So today, I'm minded to go with the Part A to acquire this site, but I certainly would like to see some sort of positive proposals in terms of actual costs and a commitment that this site, whatever is decided to do with it, can be delivered, and that is on the basis of a lease rather than a gift. So I will go along with Part A, but I really do need some convincing about the remaining two parts. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor Tarb. Does any other member speak on this proposition? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. I'll endeavour to be short, because I think most things that need to be said have broadly been said. I say that without breaching standing orders, of course, sir. But I want to just remind ourselves, as Deputy Tadea did, when we were last debating a similar proposal to this, the Assembly and the public were really quite divided, and the lobbying across the Assembly and outside as well was difficult. But we look back now and we see that that was the right decision to have taken, to buy Plymouth in a slightly different way from what is being proposed here. But it was absolutely the right thing to do. And we can go and enjoy that headland. Of course, we know that the issue of the puffin and puffin protection is not fully resolved. I don't see an easy resolution to that issue either. But what we do know is that if houses had been built there, the domestic animals and non-domestic animals that would have attracted would have meant that there was a certain demise of the puffin coming to Jersey, whereas now at least it is still frequenting our shores, and there is still a possibility, I say no more than that because it is difficult, that can be preserved as well. And I have no doubt whatsoever about the decision that day to spend that money and to allow that headland to be reverted back to nature. And I'd be very surprised if any member of this assembly today doubted that that wasn't a good and right decision, as difficult as it was on the day. And I then turned to this particular bay, and I think that we can make the decision. I know that members have some reservations, particularly around price, and I share those reservations, probably why I see the former infrastructure minister is not in his seat, but he and I debated the value and price of this site for a long period of time, knowing that the chief minister or Deputy Farnham was keen to move it forward and was less concerned about the price than we were. But we've ended up where we are today with a possible price on the table, and we are facing a risk that we make the decision to go with this price today, or we risk other actions being taken. One of the issues that was difficult with Plemont was that the government, not the government of the day, but preceding governments, had, or so the vendor felt, messed them around, sought to negotiate, threatened compulsory purchase, and they generally felt that they had been badly treated by governments and became, as we all do, and some of us are known for this, became somewhat stubborn in their approach. And it was working with the National Trust which really helped to unlock that sale, which may not have been unlocking it into public ownership, but really had the same effect as unlocking it into public ownership by putting it into the ownership of the National Trust. And therefore, I think that the price that we are being asked to pay for it today, notwithstanding all the points that the Treasury Minister has made, and she is absolutely right about that, is a price that we need now to pay. There's been a number of concerns raised about the National Trust, and I do understand, and I'll probably say something that the President and the CEO may not quite like, and they'll reprimand me later, no doubt, Sarah, as I'm driving home this evening. And that is that there are and have been difficulties as they've sought to at least sell one property, and questions have been raised about whether they themselves got best value for money over the sale of that property, and we know that the Charity Commissioner did a review into that and dealt with those issues. But equally, we know that price and valuation are movable, and the value of something to one person can be totally different to its value to a second, and what one is prepared to pay because they're already in a property compared to another equally can be two different things. So we have to navigate that carefully. For my part, I think that buying this piece of land, gifting it to the National Trust, does, in a way which I'm not sure that government could do, allow it to have access to the public and allow public enjoyment. So not public ownership, but public enjoyment, which is what we are really seeking to deliver. And the reason I use that term, and I think we've perhaps focused more on public ownership, but public enjoyment is the important issue. And that is because we have many pieces of land across the island and buildings across the island which the public owns, but of which there is no public enjoyment whatsoever. And in fact, as Deputy Farnham said in his opening comments, rather than public enjoyment, actually there's a lot of public frustration. And a lot of those sites lead islanders to doubt our ability to deal with things well. And therefore, I do think that gifting this land to the National Trust will allow public enjoyment. They've got a couple of schemes, both of which I think are perfectly workable and perfectly good solutions, but they will consult with islanders, and they will importantly, as Deputy Catherine Curtis said, consult with stakeholders in the Bay as well. When I was initially talking to National Trust, and had I not got caught up with other things, like the government plan and then the thing that we've all been caught up with during January, I would have proposed a reversion from the National Trust to the public for £1. And I think that would have really, and is still possible, and that would deal with the concerns that some may have that the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development raised. I think that works well. If the National Trust can't maintain the site for public enjoyment or can't ensure that it is used for public enjoyment, or longer wish to be the custodian for public enjoyment, then it simply reverts to the state for the value of £1, and that deals with all sorts of difficulties. So I urge members to cast their mind back to Plymouth. There were people at the time who said it was too expensive and we could have got better value for it. But with the sweep of time, that was absolutely the right decision, and I believe that this decision today can also be the right decision. And I also ask members to support the transfer to the National Trust. They've got proven ability. There are sites across the island, not just rural, but in town as well, as Constable of St Helier reminded us, where they have successfully created public enjoyment on sites that may not have allowed that. Because I'm equally convinced, whilst I'm equally convinced that this is the right decision to make, I'm equally convinced that if we don't accept Part B and gift it to the National Trust, we'll end up yet again with a slightly expensive site being left, and nothing will happen on it because it will be prioritised alongside building a new hospital and all of the other things that the new infrastructure minister rightly wishes to prioritise and deal with. And it will fall down the agenda. No doubt the car park will come back into partial use, but we will be left with a derelict, decaying building. We can deal with it once and for all this afternoon. Pay the price, we always have to pay the price because we're in government, and allow public enjoyment by gifting it to the National Trust. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the proposition? Deputy Farnham.
Is it over already, sir?
Yes, it is.
Borrow the Deputy's microphone. Thank you, first of all, thank you to all who have spoken on this. It's an important issue amongst all of the other important issues we are tasked with dealing with, and this is one that really does look to the future. I was uncomfortably reassured by the Treasury Minister by her comments, because whilst she rightly asked us to turn our minds to the money and the costs, which is what we all want to see in a Treasury Minister. We want to see firm hands on the purse strings, but not too firm, of course, when it comes to doing the right thing. And then she brought our minds back to thinking about the value. And I don't think we can probably all write down a value and we'd be something different, but it would be something different. But I do ask members to put the value, the price we're paying, weigh that up against the risk of losing the site, and think along the lines of, as Deputy Gorst referred to, the decisions we've made in the past. Plymouth, for example, I remember being here for the whole debate on Plymouth. Many other members were here. Many members who weren't here may remember listening to it. And there was strong opposition at the time. It was a divided assembly. I can't remember the final vote. But thank goodness we did trust the National Trust. And they delivered for us. And now thousands of islanders are enjoying that, and we would be enjoying that for generations to come. I'm grateful to the Constable of St Saviour, who reminded us that, you know, amongst all the other commercial, amongst other things, offerings down there's opportunity to create different commercial offerings. And I think whilst, and I think it was Deputy Catherine Curtis that talked about consultation with other stakeholders. And there's been no formal consultation, there's been informal consultation, and we've seen other stakeholders talking to the media throughout this. But there is more of a concern that if we leave the site as it is without taking it in hand, that's going to be more damaging than anything. And actually, the Trust, if you look at some of their proposals and plans, they're very much in favour of developing a completely new offering for the area, not just with a different type of restaurant or catering facility, perhaps, but putting a lot more emphasis on the recreational offering and opportunities that site could provide. Again, I want to mention I'm grateful for Deputy Stevenson for adding the amendment, which I think provides further reassurance to members. I'm also grateful to the Attorney General for his advice. And there has been examples of land gifted. The example used to the Crown, I think, is one in point. But I think the final paragraph says to authorise the Attorney General and the Greffier of the States on behalf of the public to pass any necessary contracts in connection with the acquisition and subsequent sale of the site. Now, in the spirit of this proposition, sir, I'm sure that the right contracts can be put together to achieve what we are trying to do here, which is to acquire the land and place it in the hands of the National Trust, who will be infinitely better at delivering an asset for the public that we want than we will be, sir, as a government. And I would urge members to allow the Attorney General to and the Greffier to put the necessary contracts together that will satisfy the proposition, the spirit of the proposition, sir, and safeguard the asset for future public use. Constable St John actually made a very good point, and it was music to my ears that actually we need to have a good, long, hard look at our property portfolio and perhaps sell some of the things we don't need, that aren't of any benefit, that are maybe decaying, we're not getting proper use out of, and use that money to making more strategic, carefully thought through acquisitions that perhaps will provide useful assets for public use in the future. So I'm delighted to hear that he's looking at that. And I'm also grateful to the Constable St Helier, who made a poignant speech, and grateful for him to agreeing to bring ideas for acquisitions in St Helier to improve the St Helier public realm to council ministers and ultimately this assembly. I think that's a better fit than trying to amend this amendment. Deputy Miles asked if I'd approached the National Trust or they'd approached me. Well, we sort of approached each other, but initially we sort of missed the acquisition of that site during COVID. It all sort of slipped through. It wasn't advertised. We didn't really know about it. And I remember the public concern when it was announced that that area was going to be largely lost to a large private dwelling. And I remember being lobbied fairly hard, I think, as my colleagues in the constituency would have done at the time from islanders who were concerned about that. And my proposition in July of last year was simply to encourage the government to start a process of negotiation. And I know Deputy Stevenson and Deputy Tom Binet have been working on that for some time, but things didn't seem to be happening fast enough. And I'm not making any criticisms against any member. So, but then from July to the end of the year, and I did say to I think Deputy Gorst, who was Treasury Minister at the time, and Deputy Stevenson, I was planning to give it till the end of the year to see if a negotiation could succeed, and then I would bring a proposition back, and that's what I did, sir, because I think it did get, despite efforts being made, I think perhaps it did get reprioritised with other government business. So again, no criticism of the government. I just wanted to get this done, sir, and brought into the public realm, so we could get on and do something good for the public. So yes, National Trust, and I approached them. They sort of said they were willing to do it. I had thought about Jersey Heritage and other local organisations that could perhaps deliver something like this. But I favoured the National Trust for some reasons which I hope I explained in my opening speech, but I'll come back to in a minute. But also during the July amendment last year and the end of the year, received no approaches from other organisations who were particularly interested. And I know that the National Trust work with other organisations. So just because the National Trust will lead, hopefully, on the development of the site, it doesn't mean that Jersey Heritage and other good local organisations will be excluded as we look at opportunities to improve the recreational facilities and opportunities there. And again, I thank the Constable of Trinity for speaking. He's been always open and honest with me about what his feelings are, and would require some reassurance in relation to the trust, which I hope I can do and persuade him. And I would want to emphasise, I make no criticism of the planning committee whatsoever in this. They did what they felt was right at the time, and there is no criticism or complaint about them. And as I mentioned, Deputy Gorst, I thank him for his comments, and he understands that we need to really pass this over to the National Trust, look back at Plemore and other developments they've done which have really benefited the public realm. And I ask members to consider that very carefully. So why choose the National Trust? Well, it's, I think so, because they are creative and they do deliver. They produce high quality projects, much higher than we have done. I'm not saying the states can't produce high quality projects, but in this area, we're not particularly good at it. They are an existing stakeholder and shareholder of assets of Greve de Lec Bay. The public benefit is at the heart of their organisation. It's why they do what they do. It's for the public benefit. They have made a tangible commitment of £500,000 from their own funds, sir. And members may have noticed that I placed copies of the annual report 2022 in the members' room, along with presentations of the site for members to look at, sir, which sets out their financial position. They are they are prudently and fiscally healthy, sir, and able to, notwithstanding their commitments, they are able to provide those funds, sir. And they've also committed to fundraising a further £2 million to invest in the site, should, after public consultation, it be decided that that's what the public favour, which is basically a revamping of the existing site to include all sorts of public activities, an interpretation centre, re-landscaping of the dune lands around the cafe. They are an internationally recognised brand and part of an internationally recognised movement, and that will provide useful familiarisation, not only for islanders but for visitors who come here to visit. Working with them, sir, will enhance their capacity to care for future assets, because they can make a commercial return from areas of the site that we've gifted, will enable them to not only maintain the site in a far better way than we could, sir, but it will also support them in providing funding for their organisation, sir. And I think it's good that we can support the third sector in this way, because that does take the pressure off government. And if we were to pass Part A but not pass B, then we're just putting more pressure on our already overstretched property holdings department. The National Trusts are reliable. They have been in existence for 88 years as an independent, self-funded body, sir. They are a charity. And they've been financially, fiscally, prudently independent for all of that time. And it's estimated that the annual value of the trust to Jersey's economy was 11 million. That's about 5 million economy, sir, 4 million environmental, and £2 million of social benefits, sir. And this project, if the states approve it today, will add a little bit to those figures. So thank you to all members who have spoken. I'm sorry I haven't replied to every individual member, but I hope I've covered all of the points raised. And I would like to finish by reading an excerpt from a recent editorial in the Jersey Evening Post, sir. And in many ways, I believe it perfectly captures the decision we have to make before us today. And I quote, "Over several decades, the National Trust has shown itself to be the most important organisation working to safeguard one of Jersey's greatest assets, its unique coastline, for the island and islanders. Plemore is a priceless legacy for countless future generations. And it is within the context of the success story of Plemore that the discussion about the states buying the former Romany Cafe site at Greve de Lec should be framed. Of course, cost matters, and all states members are responsible for spending taxpayers' money wisely. But this is an issue which requires them to take a responsible long-term view about what is really important in an island in which more and more people struggle to afford the quality of life that has long been central to the Jersey experience. Should this be a public asset managed by a body whose environmental, cultural and public access concerns are uppermost among its priorities? The answer to that question, I believe, sir, is obvious. So let's do something special for islanders. Let's support Part A, buy the land. Support Part B, hand this over to the National Trust, and trust the Attorney General and the Greffier to produce the contracts with the relevant wording, sir. Because if we do that, things will get moving straight away. The Trust have already said that if we approve today, they can get on with the work. If it passes contract, by the end of March, the car park can be, the cafe, the site can be tidied up very, very quickly, and the car park could be put in, made operational again for Easter, sir, which will provide a helpful boost to the traders down there for the summer, and then they can get on with the public consultation and get this done, sir. They did Plemore in a year, sir. I think they can do the same with Greve de Lec. So please, I urge members today, sir, to support the proposition in full. Because if we support Part A only, I am really concerned that we'll be left with an asset with a cafe down there, and we will let the saga run on and on and on, as we have done with other areas. So can I thank members very much, sir, and make the proposition ask for the appeal.
So to be clear, Deputy, you're inviting the Assembly to consider A, B, C and D separately?
Yes, sir. Yes, thank you.
Sir,
Scott?
Can I just confirm again with the Attorney General? I'm just confused about what happens about if we approve C and whether it's valid or
The
not.
debate is now completed.
Okay.
So that's a matter for the chair, isn't it? You could give clarification to the deputy on the.
Oh, I can indicate that if B is not adopted, then C falls away. That's in relation to the proposition. If you've got a matter about the proposition I can respond to, Deputy Scott.
My question was
give legal
simply,
advice.
are we being advised that C is not actually workable? Or are we being advised that if we voted for C, that it would be adapted in some way to make it workable?
Well, you must make up your mind on the advice you've had from the attorney and the speech of Deputy Farnham. So the appeal has been called. 4 members are invited to return to their seats, and members will first consider Part A of the proposition, which is the approval of the acquisition by the public of the land in question. I invite the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Part A has been adopted, 40 votes pour, 2 votes contra and 1 abstention.
Those members voting contra, Deputies Alex Curtis and Andrews and Deputy Luce abstained.
I'll move to Part 2 of the proposition, Part B of the proposition rather, to agree that following the acquisition of the land, it should be forthwith gifted to the National Trust for Jersey. I invite the greffier to open the voting. All members with the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that Part B has been adopted, 35 votes pour, 7 votes contra and 1 abstention.
Those members voting contra, the Connaught Harbour Trinity, Grouville and St Mary, and Deputies Morell, Miles, Alex Curtis and Andrews, and Deputy Luce abstained.
I'll move to Part C of the proposition to agree that the gift of the land to the National Trust is subject to a condition that the land must be returned to the public if the National Trust decides at any time to divest itself of ownership. I invite the greffier to open the voting. If all members have the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that Part C has been adopted, 39 votes pour, 2 votes contra and 1 abstention.
Those members voting contra, the Connaught Harbour of Trinity and Deputy Andrews.
I'll move on to Part D, which authorises the Attorney General and the Greffier of the States on behalf of the public to pass any necessary contracts. I invite the greffier to open the voting. If all members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. D has also been adopted. 39 votes pour, 3 votes contra, and 1 abstention. Proposition is therefore adopted.
May I thank members for their support. Thank you.
That concludes public business for this meeting. I invite the Chair of PPC to propose arrangements of public business for future meetings.
Our next state sitting is on the 27th of February, and this sitting will include the appointment of members to the Privileges and Procedures Committee and to scrutiny panels. And including the proposition of P7-2024 ceasefire in Gaza, there are 4 propositions listed. Jersey Overseas Aid reappointment for Commissioner P4-2024, Draft Income Tax P6-2024 with amendment, and Cabinet Office Expenditure Savings P8-2024. I believe that we'll be required to sit on 2 days, but as ever, please be aware that there's always a possibility that the states may run into the 3rd or 4th day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor. Are there any...
the arrangement of business.
Thank you very much. Any observations or comments by members on the business proposed by the Conotab? Yes, Deputy Gorst.
So I'm grateful that Deputy Tadier didn't ask for his proposition to be taken at this sitting, but I fully support his proposal that it be taken as the first item at the next sitting if the Chair of PPC is content with that.
Is that proposition seconded? Yes. Madam Chair, are you content to propose public business on the footing that that proposition is taken first?
Thank you, sir. So I propose public business as just amended by the Minister for External Relations. Thank you.
So with the ceasefire in Gaza being the first item of public business?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Are members content to proceed on that basis? Are members now content to adjourn? We adjourn until the 27th of February.